In business today, three things to know. First, the U.S. announces a new round of sanctions on Russia and the EU plans to follow. But what kind of pop will this round have on Vladimir Putin? Then, what happens when the boss turns out to be a raging racist? The Los Angeles Clippers rebel against owner Donald Sterling for alleged racist comments. How can the team, the NBA, and the fans get past this? And the price of beans in Brazil. Why the cost of your morning coffee is going up. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia, and so far the same reaction. The U.S. has issued new measures against 7 government officials and 17 companies linked to Russian President Vladimir Putin, all designed to further punish Russia for its latest actions in Ukraine. Among the companies targeted, state-controlled oil empires. The sanctions directly impact 2 of Russia's biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Gazprom, and that has ramifications for the entire sector. For a rundown on the latest sanctions, we turn to our Washington bureau chief, James Blue, who is on the phone. Good afternoon to you, James.
Hi, Andrew.
So these sanctions are targeted at individuals. Again, one of them, the CEO of Rosneft, considered to be, quote, the most frightening person in Russia because of his former role in the KGB, a very close friend of Putin. So is the idea here to get to the Russian president by going to his cronies, basically, first?
Well, yeah, I think the idea is to try to squeeze Putin's inner circle. And, you know, the sanctions we got back in March were against individuals. The sanctions we got today are both against individuals and companies. The companies that have been sanctioned are all of the companies that were run by the people who were sanctioned back in March. The particular person who is very close to Putin, Igor Sechin, he's a former KGB officer like President Putin. He served as the chief of staff in Putin's first time as president. And most importantly, Putin's enemy, Khodorkovsky, it turns out that Sechin, his company, Rosneft, now owns a lot of those oil assets. He owns about 40% of Russia's oil-producing capacity. And so this is a really significant man, both to Russia, to Putin, and to the oil sector.
So what are the chances, then, that he picks up the phone and calls his buddy and says, you're starting to cost me some money?
Well, you know, the hope is something like that will happen. The reality is that it's likely not to do much. Look, Russia is under a complete chaos financially. Lots of money is flowing out. There's likely to go into a recession this year. All of this is a result of the sanctions.
Yeah, and the gross domestic product revised substantially downward because of this. Interest rates way up. So what do the Europeans now do? What is the reaction that our partners in Europe are saying?
Well, our partners in Europe are also putting sanctions on, and they're doing that today. It's a slightly different list of people, although there is a bit of coordination between the two lists. But, you know, I got to say to you, Andrew, in a briefing today, a senior administration official said they don't expect these sanctions to change Russian action.
Well, that's the next question, James, is what is the game plan here and sort of the end game? Because there seems to be a measured step up of sanctions, because if we issued all the sanctions at once, we would be out of ammunition. We wouldn't have anything left to do. But what can we do next? There's not a whole lot.
There's not a whole lot. And, you know, in the briefing today, the thing that was really striking, obviously the next round of sanctions would be on particular sectors. That's financial and the overall energy sector of the Russian economy. And we were told today that won't happen, if at all, until Russia invades eastern Ukraine. So, you know, in reality, Andrew, I think very little will happen in terms of changing Russian actions based on these sanctions.
And it's ultimately a game of chicken.
It is a game of chicken. They know President Obama and, most importantly, the Europeans don't want to do much. But please wait. On Friday, Angela Merkel will visit the U.S. White House. We'll meet with President Obama. And if anything is decided, it's certainly an important meeting in this progression toward trying to get back at Russia.
James Blue in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unlike last week, U.S. equities brushed off developments in Eastern Europe today. Let's take a look at the final numbers on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 87.28, way off its highs, though, for the day to close at 16,448. The S&P 500 up 6 and change to 1869. NASDAQ pulling back just fractionally to 4074. And taking a look at commodities, gold is down 390. Oil, though, is the big number we keep watching at 195 because of the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Two stories drove stocks last week, Ukraine and earnings, and we're going to look at the economic scorecard of how various industries perform, but we do want to begin by taking a look at the impact of the new round of sanctions with Chris Lowe, he's chief economist with FTN Financial, and Jack Ablin, chief investment officer of BMO Private Bank, who is joining us from Chicago. Good afternoon to both of you, sir.
Good to be
Chris,
here.
I'll begin with you and your thoughts on these new round of sanctions and what impact they may have on the equity markets and especially oil.
Well, look, you know, you've got several different things going on, but from a macro viewpoint in the U.S., I think that the two key things, we don't do a whole lot of trade with Russia, so it doesn't have much GDP effect. In terms of what happens to the energy sector, equipment makers could be affected because their exports are going to be interrupted. I think that's maybe the biggest impact. And then beyond that, let's see what the White House does with export restrictions from the U.S.
Jack, let me ask you if, we're hoping that Russia has internal pressure. Is there a chance that we're going to get external pressure, meaning the CEO of BP, of Royal Dutch Shell, picking up the phone, calling their partners and saying enough is enough?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I think that what we're hoping for is that, 80% of Russians believe that Putin's major job is to deliver an economy and jobs. And, so far he's delivered until this year when we've had a stumble. Now, of course, they're rallying behind their leader, but eventually I think that, that shine will wear off. If it, comes down to business partners calling other business partners, it's possible we could see it at the corporate level. I just don't see necessarily, I see corporate to politician calls coming through anytime soon.
And why would the markets, Jack, on Friday react the way they did and today sort of brush off the sanctions? Yesterday we got sort of Friday stepped up activity in Ukraine. The markets didn't like that. And it seems to be a very sort of short attention span market.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just the trade. Andrew, I think generally those traders who are on the margin, who are inclined to buy or sell anyway, don't want to hold over the weekend, not knowing what's going on as Russian troops are amassing on the border. So I think they're more comfortable holding on a Monday, knowing that, just fewer amount of time for news to elapse. So I think that's part of it. But I think beyond that, I think, the sense is, at least among investors, is yes, we're seeing targeted sanctions. We're seeing some tension. The stakes are substantially higher for Russia than they are for anybody else. So we don't anticipate military action. And so far, we're not expecting any kind of financial crisis out of this. So for the most part, it's, it's news we got to pay attention to, but it doesn't have necessarily direct impact on earnings and markets.
Chris, would you agree that for the markets here, fundamentals and earnings are going to continue to drive the markets and not so much the political environment?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And partly, too, remember just how optimistic everybody was at the end of last year. The economy was going to be growing faster this year than it has since '07. People were really optimistic about that. So with first quarter numbers coming in, we're readjusting to reality.
Okay, and let's go now to those numbers and to the earnings, because as you said, sort of that optimism has gotten weighed down. What we've asked both of you to do is sort of put together a report card on various sectors. First, Chris, give me a 30,000-foot view of what you saw from the earnings so far, what you liked and didn't like.
Well, look, the big thing is that growth slowed, and it slowed in a whole lot of different areas, at least partly because of the weather. So we do have to sort of step back and say, okay, how much of that is the factor? But we're also seeing regulation impact financials. We're seeing healthcare at least in sort of an uproar as they try to figure out what's going on. We are seeing stronger fundamentals for the insurance companies as they look forward. So there's a lot of movement. There's also some rotation.
Okay, so let's start with the first report card, industrial. Jack, I'll start with you. You sort of gave the industrial sector a C. Why?
Yeah, it's really a mixed bag, Andrew. You know, you get companies like GE that pretty much missed on revenues, beat on earnings, but it seemed like they were, kind of manufactured earnings. You've got United Technologies, same thing, missed on revenues, beat a little bit on earnings. And then you've got other companies like, Caterpillar that beat on both. So, it sort of ran the gamut depending on what sectors they serve. But all in all, mixed bag, ugly side, optimistic side, and so I kind of met it in the middle with a C.
Chris, you were a little more optimistic, and you were a little bit more optimistic, a lot more than Jack was on the auto sector. And if we want to put that slide up, Jack, you gave it an F, and I'll come to you in a moment. Chris, you gave the auto sector a C. Neither is particularly great.
No,
I mean, I was happy with
great.
the C in school, but you do.
Look, the quarter was rough. It was really rough. The weather was lousy from December through February. It affected the numbers. And actually, in March, it wasn't so good in the Midwest either. Sales did bounce back in March. I like that, but I can't give it an A or a B for the simple reason that there's no growth anymore.
And Jack, you gave it an F, suggesting that weather was not the only factor here.
Well, it was just that the fact is, and I agree with Chris, I mean, the fact is that weather was terrible. Analysts had lowered their expectations to just above that of a limbo stick. And even still, Ford and GM failed to exceed those much lowered expectations. So, we are seeing auto sales starting to perk up. I'm hopeful things turn around for that sector. But it was an ugly quarter, and I'm sure these companies want to put it behind them.
Okay, I like this report card. We'll do it again. Jack Ablin, Chief Investment Officer of BMO Private Bank, and Chris Lowe with FTN Financial. Thank you both.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Coming up, the coverage the NBA isn't getting over the playoffs. What happens when a public relations crisis fouls up your whole game? You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Song Hai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Time now for our business ticker stories making news around the world. It is a miscalculation heard round the stock market. Bank of America is freezing an increase in dividend payouts and a planned $4 billion in stock buybacks because B of A made the announcement that it realized that it had conducted some bad math in 2009 related to the acquisition of Merrill Lynch. Bank of America stock fell by more than 6% on Monday, closing at $14.95. Comcast is getting smaller before it gets bigger. The cable company announced it will shed 3.9 million subscribers directly to a regional cable company, Charter Communications, though both companies will pick up customers from others in different areas. This will bring the post-merger Comcast-Time Warner customer base to below 30% of the nation. Opponents of the merger are still focused on the expected share of broadband customers that the combined company will have. And kids these days just don't spend enough time preparing for the future. And we're talking about kindergarten kids here. Administrators canceled the annual kindergarten play, get this, so the kids could be better equipped for college. Every year, the kindergartens perform dances and songs for one another, except this year, parents received a letter saying the show was being axed. Parents took to Facebook and social media to express outrage, but a spokesperson for the superintendent said it's in the best interest of the kids. Magic Johnson and his billionaire backer is reportedly interested in purchasing the Los Angeles Clippers from now disgraced team owner Donald Sterling. This is the latest development surrounding what has become a scandal in the NBA and the alleged racist comments caught on tape by his former girlfriend. Sponsors, including Virgin America, CarMax, State Farm, just to name a few, are now bailing out from the team as the outrage continues to mount against Sterling. No word yet from the National Basketball Association and its rookie commissioner, Adam Silver, on how the league will handle it. Crisis management expert and entrepreneur Jen Groover joins us now from Philadelphia. Jen, welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thanks for having me.
So this basically sounds like it started as a lover spat, if you will, between a man 50 years older than his girlfriend, and has now escalated into an absolute disaster. So let's take this in pieces. What does the NBA need to do tomorrow when the commissioner meets the media?
Well, they've been vocal already that they're going to utilize this as an example of how serious they are as the entire organization's reputation. They're taking this as a slash at the NBA, not just one team. They're going to probably be very clear that this is unacceptable behavior and use this as a very clear example of what is to not happen any longer and what is not accepted from any of the owners or any leader within the organization.
So, okay, we hear that from the NBA, but is that going to be enough? Because pressure is mounting for them to actually punish Sterling. And the next question is, what could they possibly do?
Well, they could definitely fine him. And I think at 80 years of age, after a long career, this isn't probably the way that he wants to go out. So there's definitely going to be some emotional distress on his part. But I'm sure they're going to fine him, and they're going to encourage him to sell the team, which we can hear now Magic Johnson's thinking as a serious consideration, which would be an interesting layer to this story, quite honestly. But, you know, the team's suffering going into the playoffs. And so the bigger story is there's a brand that we're talking about here, and then there's a team that we're talking about here, which are two different layers within this branding strategy.
Yeah, the team is obviously in the playoffs and sort of has to move past this. Now, why do you think that we have not heard from Sterling? Because you know, you just said he doesn't want to go out like this. He's had a weekend to think about this. There's a lot of things he could be saying right now to at least try to dig himself out of this mess.
Right. I'm sure his attorneys are advising him to not say anything right now to get through the authentication of the...
Jennifer, isn't that terrible advice?
I agree. Yes, he would have been better off stepping out today and saying, I'm waiting for this to be cleared. This is how I feel. I have led this team and all of these players, and I am emotionally connected to them. He should have said something that really humanizes him right now, because at this moment, he's looking like a demon, and he's not saying anything to get anyone really on his side. But I'm sure his attorneys are saying, just sit, just wait. Hopefully something worse in the news comes along to distract them.
Well, here's the problem the NBA has, in my opinion. If you start looking at the history of him, there's a history of lawsuits. There's a history of some outrageous language. And, you know, this always comes out. It always comes out that when you don't do anything and you literally sit on the sidelines and then the whole thing blows up in front of you, then people ask, why didn't you not know this before? Do you think the NBA has a bigger problem?
Right. Well, they do. I mean, there's definitely a lot of lawsuits coming out from different aspects of his professional and personal life. And so the NBA as an organization is really trying to use this as an example of how the times are changing, and they want people to really recognize that this is an organization that's collective and of high standards and excellence from everyone, no matter what race, no matter what financial background that somebody has, that they really want to stand by evolution going forward in our perception of people that work together collectively. And so there is a bigger thing here, because they've missed these warning signs along the way, and I'm sure that they're going to address that tomorrow. If I was to give them advice, I would say to absolutely address that, whether they recognize those issues or not, to handle it in a way that's coming up front and going against what people might think before people are starting to talk about it more and more and more. The best advice to give anyone when you're having adversity like this is to directly hit it head on and to address it and to eliminate as many rumors and speculation as possible, which isn't happening here.
And the NBA could follow the path of Major League Baseball about 20 years ago with Marge Schott and the Cincinnati Reds when she was caught making racist comments. They basically put her in a box for several years and forced her to sell the team.
Right, absolutely. Well, I believe seriously that's what's going to happen. I think they're going to try and hit things head on so that the organization as a whole does not see damage from this. The team is going to see damage if something doesn't happen quickly. From the playoffs perception and the whole morale around the team, but also there's such a huge boycott going on already from so many leaders that have a ton of impact, that sales are going to go down and all the camaraderie that really makes a team successful from a morale perspective as well as an economic perspective. So the NBA is not going to want to see that happen. So they're going to want to make sure that the changes are made quickly to take that perception and make it positive again so that the economics don't fall at the wayside as well.
All right, we'll see how they handle it. The NBA having a slew of problems, including falling attendance and falling TV revenue. So some challenges for them. Jen Groover, thank you from Philadelphia. Ahead, nice gig if you can get it. One Brooklyn man earns $4 million from Medicare, and he's not even a doctor, but he is our favorite person of the day here on Arise Exchange.
Here at Arise America, we want to bring you news from a different perspective, and not just news, but analysis as well. Tell me what it was like growing up gay in Uganda.
I have suffered sexual violence, including that has been planned by my family to heal me from lesbianism.
To have somebody lead your child away in handcuffs is just not something that should be done to a 12-year-old child.
So you call this Victims Advocate Group, this phone number, which is sponsored by the Catholic Church, correct?
Right.
And what kind of response did you get?
They told me not to make prank calls and it wasn't appropriate and hung up the phone.
My God. Michael Dunn could go away for many decades. Is that enough for you?
No, it's not. The person that killed Jordan Davis has to be found guilty by a court of law in the United States of America.
Time now for our favorite person of the day when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today it is a Brooklyn man who earned $4.1 million in Medicare payments, even though he is not even a doctor. According to Medicare records, Wael Bakri is a physical therapist near Coney Island and treated 1,950 patients in 1 year, and that each patient received 94 treatments, totaling $183,000. Or $500 a day. That, needless to say, has raised some eyebrows. Now, Bakri says he doesn't dispute the $4.1 million, but says not all the work was done by him, that he has others in his practice, and that no one from Medicare has ever questioned the billing. Like that really means anything. He also has echoed what other Medicare providers claim, that the data released by the government paints an incomplete picture. But still, his name alone appears on all the billing. Meantime, it turns out a lot of people in Brooklyn need physical therapy. Of the 10 physical therapists nationwide who receive the most Medicare money, half are from Brooklyn. And not just because the Nets play there. And so Wael Bakri is our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, why the price of a hot cup of joe may burn your pocketbook. You're watching Arise Exchange for this Monday. Stay with us.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Your morning kick is about to cost a lot more. The price of Brazil's Arabica coffee, the most popular of all bean varieties, has almost doubled since last year, rising 94% to $2.14 a pound. Brazil's harvest is responsible for more than a third of the world's coffee and is having a shortfall due to bad weather. That means the season is now expected to bring in 6 million fewer bags of coffee than forecasted in January, the biggest deficit in several years. With more on what all of this means is coffee expert and owner of Coffee Enterprises, Dan Cox. He is on the phone from Vermont. Dan, welcome to Arise Exchange. Pleasure to have you on.
Hey, Andrew, nice to be here.
All right, so walk us through this. What is causing this coffee shortage, and how serious is it if you're a coffee drinker?
First, it's pretty serious. I just came back from the world's largest coffee convention in Seattle, the Specialty Coffee Association of America. About 11,000 people were there, and this would be topic number one. It's not just Brazil. It's a conflagration of about 4 or 5 things. Brazil is the big one, though. Brazil usually has a crop of around between 50 and 55, and historically they were around 40 million bags a year, and a bag of Brazilian coffee is 132 pounds, 60 kilos, and they went from being in the 30s and 1980s to the 40 millions, and then the last 5 years, I think the market has been lulled into a sense of, well, Brazil is always going to have between 50 and 55 million bags. They have it's a 2-year cycle, and in the off season, it's about 50 million. So they go down about 10%, 10 to 15% in the off year.
And
this year, however, is an on year, and they're supposed to be around 55 million, and most of the projections I heard is going to come into about 45 to 48 million. And when something happens in Brazil, the rest of the world just shakes and quakes.
Now, I was going to ask you, is there other places that we can get our coffee beans?
Yes. Brazil has a kind of a two-tiered product. They have the Arabicas, which are about 35 million bags a year, and then they have the Conilons, which is also another term for Robustas. They come in about 16, sometimes 17 million bags. The number 2 producer is Vietnam, and Vietnam came from 0 to about 20, 21 million bags in the last 15 years. However, most of the Brazilian crop is made up of the Robusta species, which is the lower grade of species used for fillers and blends and used to make instant coffee. Vietnam, has got the exact opposite problem of Brazil right now. They're having cold weather and rainy weather, which then definitely affects the plants and the flowering. If you don't have good flowering, you don't have good beans, and there's nothing.
So we're looking at a worldwide coffee shortage then, and what then does that mean to everybody who needs to go to Starbucks and pay $5.50 for a cup of coffee in the morning?
Well, this is an interesting conundrum because when I look at the market, I look at two ways people buy coffee. They buy coffee by the pound and they buy coffee by the cup. I suspect that coffee by the pound is going to go up a minimum of 30 to 50 cents a pound, and that has already started. And the big players you have to look at are Kraft, Smucker's, who owns Folgers, Nestle, Starbucks, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. These are the big guys in the industry right now.
Dan, how elastic is the demand for coffee? So if you go up, 30, 50 cents, what kind of business do you lose there?
There seems to be a breaking point. A couple of years ago, or 10 years ago, it was $3.27 a pound when green coffee prices got to that. These are the commodity prices. It seems to be fairly elastic right now in that the consumer's not going to probably run away from a $2 cup of coffee. They certainly will shy away from a $4 regular cup of coffee. So when you go to your local retailer, fast service retailer, you're paying anywhere between $1 and $2 a cup. We seem to be able to tolerate that pretty well.
Dan, we have about 30 seconds left. What is the competition for coffee? If people don't buy coffee, is that going to help the tea business?
Not necessarily. 6% of Americans drink hot tea. In the United States, the tea business is all about the cold beverage. It's not about the hot beverage. So I think if you're a consumer buying coffee, I would say buy now because I got to believe the prices are going to go up a minimum of 50 cents. But at the retailer level, Starbucks announced that they're not going to raise prices, but I don't have because they bought out through 214. But most of the big guys are already buying into 215 and into year 215, and that means I got to start buying replacement coffee right now at a higher price. They have 2 choices: accept lower margins or raise prices.
Okay, Dan Cox, president of Coffee Enterprises from Vermont. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon as the coffee drama goes on. Tomorrow on Exchange, business poaching in the U.S. We'll take a look at how some states are luring businesses from one state to another and the impact on the economy. Let's take a look at the final numbers on Wall Street again. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 87 points to 16,448, brushing off problems in Eastern Europe for now. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching.